The coffee hit Cornelius Tolliver in the chest before he understood it was coffee, and the man who threw it was already smiling when he said the words that the whole room would remember for the rest of their lives. "Crawl out. That's all you're good for now. Crawl." Cornelius did not flinch. 79 years old, a field jacket gone soft as a worn dollar bill, a prosthetic leg resting against the chrome table leg, and a plate of half-eaten pancakes now wearing a brown river of coffee across it. He set his fork down with the care of a man who had learned long ago that the slowest movements are the ones that frighten people most. He looked up at the silver-haired man in the $4,000 suit, and he did not say a word. Behind the counter, a coffee pot slipped 2 inches in a young waitress's grip, and she caught it against her apron. A priest in a back booth half rose, then sat, then did not know what to do with his hands. Outside, rain came sideways across a gravel lot where 3 black SUVs sat with their engines running, and the morning was the kind of gray that makes a small diner feel like the last warm room in the world. The man in the suit leaned in closer, close enough that Cornelius could smell the breath mint failing to hide the coffee on him too. "I said crawl, old man. You're bad for business, my business. That is where this stops. And where it begins. Back up 19 days to the first morning, before any of these people had names to each other. The diner was called Lorena's, and it sat at the bottom of a county road where the state highway curved away toward the river, in a town small enough that the post office and the church shared a parking lot. The woman who ran it, Lorena Galloway, had buried a husband and raised a daughter in the apartment over the kitchen. And she had served Cornelius Tolliver the same breakfast every Tuesday and Friday for 11 years. 2 eggs, hard. Pancakes, no butter. Coffee black. He paid in exact change from a cracked leather coin purse, and he left $2 under the salt shaker, and he never once asked her how she was doing without meaning it. She knew the sound of his truck before she saw it, an old diesel that coughed twice and then settled. She knew he came in slow on the rain days because the prosthetic socket rubbed when the weather turned, though he had never told her that and never would. She knew the way he set his cap on the seat beside him, crown down, the way a man does who learned to respect a hat in a place where hats meant something. What she did not know, that first Tuesday morning of the trouble, was that the river road had been sold. Marissa Galloway, her daughter, 22, and back home after a semester she could not afford to finish, brought Cornelius his coffee and noticed the man in the corner booth she had never seen before. He had a laptop open and 2 phones face up and a way of looking at the room like he was reading a price tag on all of it. When she refilled his cup, he asked her without looking up how long the diner had been there. "My grandmother built it," Marissa said. 1961. The man said. The way he said it made her want to wash her hands. His name was Bradford Lockhart, and he was the chief executive of a development company that had spent the winter quietly buying the river frontage parcel by parcel. He had a daughter at a college with ivy on it, and a wife in a city 300 miles away, and a reputation, in the rooms where these things are discussed, as a man who could look at a tired little town and see a marina, a row of condominiums, a parking structure, and a return on investment of 19%. He had come to look at the last parcel he did not own. Lorena's sat on it. He watched the old man in the field jacket eat his eggs. He watched the way the regulars came in and touched the old man's shoulder on their way to the counter. The deputy and the feed store manager and the woman who cut hair 2 doors down. He watched the old man become, over the course of 40 minutes, the warm center of a room that Bradford Lockhart needed to be empty. He did not yet know who the old man was. That is the first thing to understand about what happened. He never bothered to find out. He looked at a poor old veteran in a second-hand coat, and he filed him under a word, and the word was obstacle. Cornelius, for his part, noticed the man too. You do not survive what he survived without learning to read a room from the door inward. And the man in the corner booth had the posture of someone deciding what to do with things that could not consent. Cornelius had seen that posture in a dozen countries. He finished his eggs. He left his $2 under the salt shaker. On his way out, he stopped, the way he always did, at the framed photograph by the register, and he touched 2 fingers to the glass. The photograph was old, black and white. A young man in fatigues squinting into a hard sun with his arm around another young man whose face the years had not been kind enough to keep clear. Marisa had asked him about it once. He had said only, "Friend of mine." He liked this kind of place. And then he had gone out into the morning and driven his coughing truck home to the small house where he lived alone, and where, in a footlocker at the end of his bed, there was a folded flag, a leather notebook with a cover gone soft as skin, and a medal he had never once shown to anyone in that town. That was the world before. Hold the old man's 2 fingers on the glass. We come back to that photograph. The wound opened on the second Friday, and it opened in front of the one person whose opinion still mattered to Cornelius Tolliver in this life. Her name was Naomi, and she was 11, and she was his granddaughter, and her heart had been built wrong. She lived 2 counties over with Cornelius's son and his wife, and there was a surgery coming, a real one, the kind with a number attached that made grown adults go quiet, and the insurance covered some of it and not enough of it. And Cornelius had been doing a thing all winter that he had told no one about. He had been selling pieces of his life. The truck would go next. He had already sold his father's watch and a rifle he had carried home from a war and a parcel of family land that backed up to nothing, and every dollar of it went into a coffee can in his kitchen with Naomi written on the lid in his late wife's handwriting, because Eunice had labeled everything in that kitchen before the cancer took her, and he could not bring himself to peel off even her labels. On that Friday, his son drove Naomi up to see him, because she had wanted pancakes at the place Grandpa always talked about. And Cornelius had risen at 5 to be sure the rain had not flooded the low road, and he had worn the better of his 2 shirts. They were in the corner booth. His booth now, the man named Lockhart having claimed a different one for his phones, when Lockhart's deputy came in. Garrett Holcomb was younger, harder, the kind of man who carries his boss's cruelty so the boss can keep his own hands clean. He had paperwork. He went to the counter, and he told Lorena Galloway, in a voice pitched to Carrie, that her lease on the building was held through a land trust that his company now controlled, and that the trust would not be renewing, and that she had 60 days. 60 days. Mark that number. 60 days to vacate a building her mother had built with her own hands in 1961. Lorena did not cry. She was not a woman who cried in front of customers. But she put one hand flat on the counter to steady herself, and Marissa came out of the kitchen with flour on her wrists, and the whole room heard it. And into that silence, Naomi Tolliver, 11 years old, asked her grandfather in a clear, small voice, "Grandpa, are they going to make her leave?" And Cornelius Tolliver, who had carried men out of fire, who had stood in front of things much worse than a man in a suit, looked at his granddaughter and did not have an answer that was both true and bearable. That was the wound, not the coffee that came later. This. The moment a child he was selling his life to save asked him to fix something, and for the first time in her presence, he could not. He stood up. He crossed the room. He stopped at Holcomb's elbow, and he said quietly, "Not for the room. There are ways to do a thing like this that leave a person their dignity. You're not using any of them." Holcomb looked at the old coat, and the way the old man stood his weight on one side, and he smiled, and he said, "And who are you?" "Nobody you've met," Cornelius said. "Yet." Holcomb laughed. He picked up his paperwork. On his way out, he stopped at the register, at the photograph by it, and he tapped the glass with one knuckle, hard, the way you would not touch a thing that mattered to a person. And he said, "Cute. Whole place is a museum." And he left, and the bell over the door rang, and Naomi was still waiting for an answer. Here is what the room did not know and what you now do, so that everything after this carries its full weight. The man in the photograph by the register was named Eugene Faison. He died in 1971 in a place that did not make the maps, pulling a wounded lieutenant out of a burning vehicle. Cornelius Tolliver was the man who finished what Eugene started, who carried that lieutenant the last 400 yards on a leg that a mine had already opened to the bone, and who set him down behind a wall, and then lost the leg and very nearly lost the rest. The lieutenant lived. Cornelius never told anyone who that lieutenant became, because Cornelius did not think a debt was a thing you cashed, but the lieutenant remembered. The lieutenant remembered every year, on the same date, with a phone call, and the lieutenant's name, the man on the other end of a number in a leather notebook gone soft as skin, was Theodore Pemberton. By the spring of the trouble, Theodore Pemberton wore 4 stars on each shoulder. You know this now. Bradford Lockhart does not. Hold it. The first hot confrontation came 3 days after the wound, and Lockhart started it. Because Lockhart had learned that the old man in the field jacket was not just a regular, but something the town treated as load-bearing. And a man who reads a town as a balance sheet hates a column he cannot quantify. Cornelius came in on a Tuesday. Lockhart was waiting, and he had brought an audience, 2 of his people and Holcomb, and he stood up when Cornelius sat down, and he came over and put both hands on the back of the booth across from him and said, "You're a fixture around here." "I eat breakfast," Cornelius said. "You eat breakfast in my building," Lockhart said. "On my road. People listen to you. I've watched it. So I'm going to do you a courtesy I don't extend to many people. I'm going to tell you what's coming so you can get out of the way of it. This whole strip comes down in the fall. The diner, the church lot, all of it. There's a vision here, and the vision does not include men like you sitting in the window where my investors can see you when I bring them through." "Men like me," Cornelius repeated. "Old," Lockhart said. And he let the word do the work the room knew it was doing. The way a careful man can say one true thing to deliver 3 cruel ones. "Tired. Yesterday. The whole place smells like yesterday, and you're the worst of it. So when I bring my people through next week, you're going to find somewhere else to be." He straightened. He smiled at the room as if he'd done it a kindness. "I'm a reasonable man. I'm giving you notice." Cornelius looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his field jacket and took out a stub of carpenter's pencil and a paper napkin, and slowly, in block letters, he wrote down the name on the side of the SUVs in the lot and the plate beneath it and the date. And he folded the napkin twice and put it in his breast pocket. And he did all of this without hurry, while Bradford Lockhart watched and did not understand that he had just been documented by a man who had spent 40 years learning that the patient hand wins. "You writing me a love letter?" Lockhart said. "Something like that," Cornelius said, and picked up his fork. Lockhart won that round on the surface. He had said his piece, had cowed the room, had walked out tall. But the napkin was in the old man's pocket, and you, watching, understood what Lockhart did not. That the balance had not gone where Lockhart thought it had. That night, Cornelius sat at his kitchen table under the one bulb that still worked, and he opened the leather notebook gone soft as skin. He had not used the number in 2 years. He told himself he was not going to use it now. He told himself a man does not call in a debt to save a diner. He sat with the notebook open to the page and the coffee can, with Eunice's handwriting on the lid in front of him. Naomi. And he did the arithmetic he did every night. The dollars in the can against the number for the surgery, and the column did not close. He closed the notebook. He did not call. Not yet. Remember the can. Remember the number that would not close. We come back to both. But he did make a different call. He called Lorena Galloway and asked her, in the plain way he asked everything, whether the land trust paperwork Holcomb had waved around had a real signature on it, or just a logo, and whether she had kept it, and whether she would let him look. Lorena, who had spent 3 nights not sleeping, said yes. The cold move had begun, and you, watching, could feel the patient dread of it gather. The old man was not going to fight this man with his fists. He was going to fight him with paper, and paper takes time, and the clock said 60 days, and now it said 51. The second hot confrontation belonged to Lorena, and it cost her something to be in it. Lockhart came back the following Monday with his investors, 3 of them, in coats that had never been rained on, and he walked them through the diner at the breakfast rush, like a man showing buyers through a house he intends to demolish. He narrated. He gestured at the booths and said the word "tear down" loud enough to be heard, and he gestured at the regulars and said the word "demographic." And he stopped at the counter where Lorena stood, and he said to the investors, not to her, the current operator's on a short clock. We won't have a continuity problem. Lorena Galloway set down the plates she was carrying. She was 61 years old, and her mother's hands were in the foundation of that building, and she said, in front of the investors, "You want to tear my mother's place down, you say it to me. Not over my head like I'm furniture." Lockhart turned. He looked at her the way you look at a stain. And then he did the thing that the careful ones do. He smiled and made his voice gentle, which is worse than a shout, and he said, "Ma'am, you're emotional, and I understand, but the decision's been made by people above your pay grade, and the more you carry on, the harder you make it on your daughter, who I notice still works here. 60 days goes fast. I'd hate for it to go faster." It was a threat dressed as concern, and everyone heard it. And Lorena's daughter heard it from the kitchen door. And Lorena, who had not cried in front of a customer in 40 years, had to turn and walk into the back so she would not start now. Lockhart turned to his investors and spread his hands as if to say, "You see what I'm dealing with?" He had won again. He had made a woman flee her own counter. And the cruelty of it was specific and witnessed. And it sat in the chest of every person in that room. And it was meant to. Marissa came out of the kitchen and stood where her mother had stood, flour on her wrists. And she looked at Bradford Lockhart with an expression he did not bother to read, because young waitresses were not on his balance sheet either. That was his second mistake. He would not learn about it until the end. The fourth confrontation was cold, and it was the old man's, and you, the listener, got to watch him move a piece that no one else at the table could see. Cornelius had taken Lorena's paperwork to a man he trusted 2 towns over, a retired clerk named Father Lyle Renfro, who had left the law for the church, but never quite left the law. And the priest had read the land trust documents twice and made a sound in his throat and said, "Cornelius, this trust didn't exist 8 months ago. And the easement they're claiming on the river road, the one that lets them force the diner out, it runs across a strip of ground that's already got a federal designation on it. Or it's supposed to." "What kind of designation?" Cornelius said. "Yes, a memorial registry," the priest said. "Somebody, decades back, put a piece of that river frontage on a national register. A small monument. Names on a stone. You can't develop registered memorial ground without a federal sign-off that takes years and almost never comes. If that designation is real and still active, this man's whole project is built on sand. Cornelius went very still. He asked the priest to read him the names on the stone. The priest had a photograph of it, faded, taken years ago. He read them. The third name on the stone was Eugene Faison. Now you understand the shape of the thing. And the old man understood it too. Sitting in a rectory in the rain. The land Bradford Lockhart needed, the river frontage his marina required, included a small, forgotten monument that Cornelius Tolliver himself had petitioned the government to place 50 years ago, over the ground where his friend's name could rest near water, because Eugene Faison had liked places near water. Lockhart was not just throwing an old man out of a diner. He was about to bulldoze the one stone in the world with Eugene's name on it. This is the connection turn. Two things the listener thought were separate, a diner and a grave, were the same fight. And the old man left the rectory and sat in his coughing truck in the rain for a long time before he could drive. The fifth confrontation is the one where it all came apart. And it came apart in the worst way, in front of the most people, at the lowest cost to Lockhart and the highest cost to Cornelius. This is the real failure, not almost. All the way down, Cornelius brought what he had to the diner on a Friday morning to show Lorena, copies of the memorial registry, the priest's notes, the photograph of the stone. He wanted her to have it before she signed anything, before 60 days became 30. He laid it on the table, and he had not counted on Lockhart being there. And Lockhart being a man who, when he saw papers in an old man's hand and the diner owner leaning over them, understood in an instant that the old man was a threat and not a fixture. And a threatened man like Lockhart does not get careful. He gets fast and he gets dirty. Lockhart crossed the room. He did not ask what the papers were. He picked up his own coffee from the next table and he poured it, slowly, deliberately, across the documents spread on the table, across the photograph of the stone, across the registry copies, ruining them. And then, because that was not enough, because the room was watching and he needed the room to learn its lesson, he threw the rest of the cup at the old man's chest. "Crawl out," he said, and smiled. "That's all you're good for now. Crawl." And here we are, back at the beginning, back at the coffee on the field jacket, the waitress catching the pot against her apron, the priest half rising, the SUVs idling in the rain. But it got worse than the coffee. Cornelius stood slow, the way he did everything, and Lockhart, riding the room, called over his shoulder to the deputy who had come in for his usual, a local man named Wade Eubanks, who owed Lockhart's company a favor on a permit. And Lockhart said, "Officer, this man assaulted me, threw his food. I want him removed." It was a lie so brazen that for a moment no one moved. But the deputy owed a favor, and the deputy did not want trouble with a man who held permits over half the county. And so the deputy came and took the old man by the arm to walk him out, gently, ashamed, but he took him. And as Cornelius turned, the medal that he carried always in his breast pocket, the one he had never shown this town, the one that had been pinned to his chest by a man whose name would have stopped every heart in that room, slipped from the wet jacket and fell to the floor and skittered under a booth. Cornelius Tolliver, 79 years old, got down on his good knee in a puddle of his own coffee in front of the whole diner and reached under the booth for it, and Bradford Lockhart looked down at the old man on the floor and said, "For the room, there it is. Knew you had it in you." And the old man, on his knee, found the medal and closed his hand around it and let the deputy walk him out into the rain. He had lost. He had been made to crawl after all. The papers were destroyed. The deputy had taken his side away from him. Naomi's grandfather had been put on the floor in front of the town, and the can in his kitchen still would not close, and the 60 days was now 29, and there was nothing in his hands but a wet metal and the rain. He sat in his truck, and he did not turn the key. He had told himself a man does not call in a debt. He had told himself that for 19 days. He opened the leather notebook gone soft as skin, and the rain ran down the windshield, and he looked at the number for a long time. Then he did not call it, even now. Because a thing had hardened in him that was not about the diner or the debt. It was about the stone. He started the truck. He drove not home but to the river frontage in the rain, and he found the monument under a tarp that Lockhart's survey crew had thrown over it. And he pulled the tarp back, and he stood in front of the small stone with the 3 names on it, his hand on Eugene Faison's name, and he said out loud, to a man 50 years dead, "I'm sorry, I'm going to need help. You always said it was all right to need help." And then, in the rain, on the ground where his friend's name was carved, Cornelius Tolliver finally made the call. The 6th confrontation was cold, and it did not belong to Cornelius at all. It belonged to Marissa Galloway, 22, flower on her wrists. The daughter Lockhart had filed under nothing. She had been filming. From the kitchen doorway, on a cracked phone, she had filmed the whole of that Friday morning. The coffee poured on the papers, the cup thrown at the old man's chest, the lie to the deputy, the old man on his knee in the puddle reaching for something under a booth. The words crawl out. That's all you're good for now. She had it all. And she had spent the weekend not sleeping, like her mother, knowing that if she posted it, she would be putting her own name and her mother's last 60 days of livelihood in front of a man who held the lease and held the permits and had already shown he would lie to the law without blinking. If it went wrong, Lockhart could make the rest of that countdown a nightmare. He could find a reason to close the diner in a week instead of a month. Her mother had begged her not to. She thought about what she stood to lose. And then she thought about an old man on his knee in a puddle. The man who left $2 under the salt shaker every single time, who touched the glass on the photograph every single time, and she made a copy of the video, and she did not post it to the world. Not yet. Because she had learned one thing watching Cornelius Tolliver for 3 years, which is that the patient move beats the loud one. She found out, from the priest, the one fact that changed how she aimed it. She found out whose name was carved on the stone by the river, and she sent the video with a note to one place, an office in a city 300 miles away, an office she had to call 4 times to get the right address for, the office of the man who, the priest told her, used to call the old man every year on the same date. She did not know if it would reach him. She sent it anyway, and it cost her 3 sleepless nights and a fight with her mother and the certainty that if it failed, the last month of Lorena's would be hell. She sent it anyway. That is what it costs to break a silence. You pay before you know if it worked. It reached him. The 7th confrontation is the peak. And it began with the sound of the SUVs not being the only engines in the lot. It was the following Tuesday, the breakfast rush. The rain back again as if it had never left. Bradford Lockhart was there, of course, with Holcomb and 2 investors, because he had decided to make a show of the closing paperwork on the very table where he had poured the coffee. A final humiliation staged for an audience. The diner half full of the regulars who could not look at the corner booth without their stomachs turning. Cornelius Tolliver was there too, in the corner booth, because Lorena had asked him to be, because she did not want to face it without him. And he had come, in the better of his 2 shirts, the medal back in his breast pocket where it lived. The bell over the door did not ring the way it usually rang. It rang, and then it kept ringing, held, because the door was held open. And into the warm last room in the world came a man in a dress uniform so dark it was almost black. the rain still on his shoulders, and the room did not need to be told what the 4 stars meant. Behind him came a younger officer with a leather folder under his arm, and behind that one, 2 more, and the lot outside had filled with vehicles that were not Lockhart's. The general did not announce himself. He did not have to. He stood inside the door, and he let his presence do the announcing, and he scanned the room once, slow, the way a man does who has walked into rooms that mattered his whole life, and his eyes found the corner booth, and they stopped. Bradford Lockhart, who had spent 19 days reading every room he entered as a thing to be priced, made the last and largest miscalculation of his career. He saw a uniform and an audience, and he thought, an opportunity. He stood up, all charm, and he crossed toward the general with his hand out, and he said, "General, Bradford Lockhart, welcome. We don't often get distinguished." "I didn't come for you," the general said. He did not take the hand. He did not raise his voice. He walked past Bradford Lockhart's outstretched hand as if it were not in the air at all, and the whole room watched the most powerful man any of them had ever seen walk straight past the man who had been the most powerful in the room for 19 days. And the general crossed to the corner booth, and he stopped in front of the old man in the field jacket, and he came to attention, and he saluted. "I came for him." The room did not breathe. Lockhart stood with his hand still half out, the charm sliding off his face like the coffee had slid off the papers. The general held the salute. Cornelius Tolliver looked up at him for a long moment, and something moved across the old man's face that was not for any of them. And then, slow, the way he did everything, he raised his hand and returned it. "You didn't have to come, Theodore," Cornelius said quietly. "Gee, I have come every year for 50 years, the general said, "and you have never once asked me for a thing. The day you finally let someone send for me, I move heaven to get here." He lowered his hand. He turned then, and he looked at the room, and now he raised his voice. Just enough. "My name is Theodore Pemberton. 51 years ago, this man carried me 400 yards across open ground on a leg a mine had already taken from him. He set me down behind a wall, and then he fell, and the medics did not think either of us would see morning. I am alive because of him. There is not a soldier in the vehicles outside who does not know his name. We were taught it before we were taught our own unit's history. He is the reason a great many of us are anything at all." The aide stepped forward and set the leather folder on the corner booth's table, the same table that had worn the coffee, and opened it. He did not read from it. He did not have to. He simply turned it so that the room and the investors and Bradford Lockhart could see what was inside. The first separation came here, before a single document was spoken aloud. The general stood and let the silence hold, and the only sound was the rain on the window and the small, wet click the general made, a thing he did without knowing he did it, pressing his thumb once against the face of his own watch, the watch he had worn every day for 50 years, because the man in front of him had pulled him out of the fire on the day it stopped and started again. The first thing in the folder was a photograph. It was the same photograph that hung by the register. 2 young men squinting into a hard sun. The aide said quietly, the only words he would say, "The man on the left is General Pemberton's predecessor in command. The man on the right is Sergeant Cornelius Tolliver. The third man, the one who took this picture, is named on a stone by the river. Eugene Faison." Marissa Galloway, behind the counter, put her flour-dusted hand over her mouth. The rain went on. Nobody moved. The general pressed his thumb to the watch face again, once, and let it pass. The second thing the aide turned to was the memorial registry, a clean copy, not the one Lockhart had ruined, a federal copy carrying a federal seal, establishing that the river frontage included protected memorial ground that could not be developed, had never been lawfully cleared for development, and that any land trust claiming an easement across it had been built, as the priest had said, on sand. The investors in their rain-free coats began, very quietly, to put their phones away. The general let it sit. Outside, one of the military vehicle's wipers swept once and stopped. Inside, the coffee pot Marissa had set down had gone cold, and a thread of nothing rose off it. The third thing was the thing that turned a collection of cruelty into a crime. The aide turned to a single page, and the general spoke this one himself, because he wanted it in his own voice. The trust this man used to threaten this diner was created 8 months ago and backdated. The signature establishing its claim over the memorial ground is forged. We know it is forged because the official it claims to be signed by retired and died 2 years before the date on the document. He looked at Lockhart, finally, for the first time since the door. You did not just throw an old man out of a diner. You falsified a federal instrument to bulldoze a war memorial, and you picked, of all the old men in all the country, the one whose name is carved on the stone you were trying to erase. The fourth separation was the longest. The general said nothing more. He simply waited and let the room arrive, one face at a time, at the size of what had been done. The rain, the cold coffee pot, the held door. And then a thing happened that no one had planned. The priest, Father Renfro, who had driven over that morning on a feeling he could not name, rose from the back booth and walked the length of the diner, slow, and stopped at the register, and took the framed photograph off its nail, and carried it to the corner booth, and set it upright on the table beside the open folder, so that the young man squinting into the sun was looking at the old man he had become. And then the priest stepped back, and that was all, and it was everything. Then it collapsed, in real time, the way these things do, fast at the end after being slow for so long. The investors did not wait for a second word. One of them said to no one, "We were not informed of any of this," and gathered his coat, and the other two followed. And the bell over the door rang 3 times in quick succession as the money walked out into the rain. Holcomb, the deputy, the hard younger man who had tapped the glass with his knuckle, looked at the 4 stars and the federal seal and the vehicles in the lot, and did the arithmetic of his own future, and set down the closing paperwork on the table very carefully, as if it might go off, and stepped back from his boss, physically. 2 feet of new distance between them that said everything about what was coming, and Bradford Lockhart stood alone in the middle of the room he had owned, and found that he owned nothing in it. The general turned from him, as if he had already ceased to exist, which, in every way that would matter from that morning forward, he had. He crouched, slow, in front of the corner booth, putting his 4-starred shoulder down to the level of the old man in the field jacket, and he did the human thing, the thing that was true to exactly who he was. He reached into his own breast pocket and took out a small worn coin, a unit coin, edges gone smooth with 50 years of a thumb, and he pressed it into the old man's hand, the way you would return something borrowed. And he said, low, only for Cornelius, "There's a girl needs a heart fixed. I know about the can on your counter. It's handled. It was handled the minute the video reached my desk. You will not sell that truck." And Cornelius Tolliver, who had not let this town see his face change in 19 days, who had been made to crawl on a wet floor in front of all of them, closed his hand around the coin and put his other hand over the general's. And the 2 old soldiers held there a moment, and neither one of them said a single thing about it. Because the men who carry each other out of fire do not narrate the carrying. The new world came in quietly, the way it does after the loud part ends. The video Marissa had sent to one office did not stay in one office. Within a week it was everywhere, but it carried with it now the federal seal and the general's name and the photograph of the stone, so that it could not be twisted into anything but what it was. The clip of a man pouring coffee on an old veteran's war records became, in the way these things travel, the clip of a developer who forged a federal document to bulldoze a memorial, which is a different and unsurvivable kind of famous. The land trust collapsed under its own forgery within the month. The river frontage project died, every parcel of it. The investors gone, the financing gone. The marina that was going to have 19% returns, now a thing that existed only as renderings in a folder no one would open again. The river frontage memorial was resurveyed, properly this time, by people who took their caps off near it, and a new stone was set beside the old one, larger, and the three names were carved again so deep that weather would not take them in any of our lifetimes. And beneath them, at Cornelius's request, and over his objection that it was too much, one more line, and the men who carried them. Lorena's did not close. The lease, built on the forged trust, dissolved with it, and the building came back to Lorena Galloway free of any claim, her mother's foundation under her feet. No 60 days, no 30, no countdown at all. She kept the corner booth exactly as it was. She put the photograph back on its nail by the register, and beside it, she hung the worn unit coin in a small frame, with no name on the placard, because Cornelius asked that there be no name. And Lorena, who understood him, obliged. Naomi Tolliver had her surgery in the spring. It went the way the doctors hope and rarely promise. She is 12 now, and she runs, which she could not do before. And she does not yet fully understand the story of how the bill got paid. Only that her grandfather did not have to sell his truck after all, and that a tall man in a uniform sends her a card on her birthday with a unit coin taped inside it. A new one each year, edges still sharp, hers to wear smooth. Marissa Galloway finished the semester she could not afford, on a scholarship that arrived without a name attached to it, which is a thing the general would deny if you asked him, and which everyone understood anyway. She tends bar at Lorena's on weekends and studies law on weekdays, and when people ask her why law, she tells them about a morning she stood in a kitchen doorway with flour on her wrists and a cracked phone in her hand, and learned that the patient move beats the loud one. Father Renfro still drives over on Tuesdays. He sits in the back booth and he watches the corner booth, and he never says what he is watching for, and everyone lets him. Wade Eubanks, the deputy, turned in the favor he owed and the badge he wore within the same season, and the county is better for the second of those than the first. Bradford Lockhart is a name now, the way the general said it would be, attached forever to a thing he did. The company is gone. The daughter at the college with the ivy on it changed her last name, quietly, which is the one sentence of ripple that need be said. Garrett Holcomb testified against his old boss to save himself, and saved himself, and lives somewhere now where no one knows to ask him what the smile was for. Lockhart himself is an absence in the rooms where these things are discussed, a cautionary thing, a silence men make when his name comes up. He is not in prison for the whole of it, the law being slower and smaller than justice, but he is finished. And finished is its own country, and he lives in it alone. Cornelius Tolliver still comes in on Tuesdays and Fridays. 2 eggs, hard, pancakes, no butter, coffee black. He still pays an exact change from the cracked leather coin purse, and he still leaves $2 under the salt shaker. And on his way out, he still stops at the register and touches 2 fingers to the glass over the photograph of 2 young men squinting into a hard sun. One Tuesday, not long ago, the general came again, out of uniform this time, in an old coat not so different from the field jacket, and the two of them sat in the corner booth for a long while over coffee, and the whole diner gave them the room without being asked. Naomi sat between them, swinging the legs that worked now. At the end, the general stood to go, and he put his hand for a moment on the old man's shoulder, the way the regulars do, and Cornelius put his own hand up over it, the way he had on the morning the salute came, and the two of them held there. Neither one said a word. They never have. They never will. Have you ever looked at someone the world had already decided was finished? The worn coat, the slow walk, the second-hand everything, and quietly priced them as less than they are? Cornelius carried a man 400 yards and never once mentioned it. Now ask yourself the harder thing. Who in your own life carried you, paid a cost you never saw, and walked away before you could thank them, while you let the world keep calling them ordinary? Tell me about that person in the comments. Say their name out loud where it can be read. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs the reminder that dignity does not wear a price tag. We tell these stories so the carried remember the ones who carried them.